Our next speaker, I'm very excited about. We are here talking about a lot of strategic things, positioning, security, economics, but something that doesn't get discussed very often is what do the arts look like in space? What might other maybe non-science or innovation specific industries look like in space? And our next speaker will enlighten us a little bit about that. Lee Steinke is a scientist and executive with a track record of delivering value through leadership of science strategy and operations. What you won't find on her LinkedIn page is that she is also a retired professional dancer and dance company founder who has performed at the Kennedy Center and the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, as well as in cities across the U.S. and on tour with the Gypsy Festival in southern France and Hungary. She also misspent her youth playing in professional pool tournaments, once even facing perennial 9-ball champion Allison Fisher. Lee chairs the advisory board for the Rocky Mountain Association of Geologists and Volunteers at Space Foundation on a program for the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs. She holds a bachelor's degree from UNC Chapel Hill, a master's from Yale, and an MBA from Wharton. She may also be the next candidate for the most interesting woman in the world. Please welcome Lee Steinke.
Thank you so much, Lila. That was fun. Let's see if I can share my screen here.
And yeah, I've got you on backup if you need it.
Thank you so much. All right, so if you've been following these Blue Marble Week conferences, you've probably heard Tim Chrisman refer to human beings as fancy monkeys who wear pants. And I'd take that a bit further and say we're fancy monkeys who wear pants and write music and play baseball, and sometimes we have to make PowerPoint slides. The fact is that art and sport are integral to our humanity, and we take them with us on our most daring adventures. Today, I'll cover what I've learned about art and sport in space through conversations with forward-thinking experts in a variety of fields. And I'll do my best to tie it back to our strategy conversation as well. All right, so I want to start with a question. Captain Scott brought this phonograph on his ill-fated 1910 expedition to Antarctica. I'm curious what you all would bring to create art or to play sport, and what you might load on your phone. So if you all want to enter some ideas into the chat or in the YouTube and Facebook comments, please go ahead and do that, and we'll revisit those after the next slide. So I had an opportunity to talk with Dr. Cyan Proctor about what she brought with her on her expeditions. She's a professor, an analog astronaut, and an Afrofuturist artist. One of her artworks there on the top left, beautiful piece featuring her character Afrobotica. The expeditions she's been on are the High Seas Habitat in Hawaii and the JOIDES Resolution research ship. And the things that she brought with her to consume as a consumer of art and sport, she brought music and books. And for the High Seas experience, which was a 4-month mission, she brought a care package from a friend that had something for her to open each day. And a lot of those were mini artworks that she could put on the walls of the dome for all to enjoy. In terms of creating art or playing sport, she wrote poetry on that mission and created video blogs and live broadcasts as part of her responsibilities on those missions. One of the things in our conversation that came to light was her experience with the architecture as art. And she found the ship to feel more cold and mechanical because of the industrial metal interior, the small windows, and the night shift. Whereas the High Seas Habitat is a high-ceilinged white dome. And she said that that gave it more of a warm and inviting feel. But regardless of that difference in the architectural experience, her importance that she put on ritual and the celebration of milestones as part of the culture there, because you're isolated and rely only on your crewmates became much more elevated. So now that we know what she brought along with her, can we hear some comments? Did anyone mention any ideas? You're muted, Michael, for me anyway.
Sorry.
I was like, what's wrong with my sound?
I'm just really, it's been a year. It's like we should all know how to turn the microphone on and off. But yet I didn't. What I was doing was reading it for you. So my comments were camera and editing tools. Lila says plants and flowers. Terry, I think that's a book maybe that says how to survive in microgravity and a shovel. Podcast equipment, Pandora. So lots of different choices.
Good. Yes, we all get involved in this. So why are we talking about art and sport at a serious space conference where we're talking about investment thesis and arguments for legislation going forward? I was able to talk to my friend Dana Tysoon Burgess, who is a cultural envoy for the US State Department. And this image is from a piece he choreographed called We Choose to Go to the Moon, which was commissioned by NASA in 2015. And our conversation talked about how culture is strategic. So culture has been used through the years to advance and reinforce policy and diplomacy, starting with our Star Betsy Ross sewing the flag and the Star Spangled Banner song, the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. It's part of the US State Department since the 60s. And then of course, the Olympics, one of our greatest international achievements. And then on the economic development side, recreation, sport, and art make up almost 5% of US GDP. And that number includes jobs that are not artists and athletes, right? There's a whole ecosystem around that system as well. So jobs in support, secondary and tertiary markets for equipment, ownership, marketing, all kinds of different fields involved in that. And workforce development, not the sexiest term in legislative circles, but it's exciting and something that obviously we're having to focus on a lot for longer term space investment. Most importantly, I think culture can be used to celebrate our successes as well as our international collaborations. Now, when you take that culture, the strategic aspects of culture, and you put them on the stage of space, it just enhances the power of that messaging. And the reason for that is that these are the words that people use to describe space in the interviews that I held. So hope was the most commonly recurring. It's simply a fact that one of our greatest resources is the vast infinity of space and the possibility of finding meaning there. And so especially in this time of revitalization after a global pandemic, putting it on that stage can really have an impact. So just as culture is strategic, strategy is cultural. So to many of the people I interviewed, the US symbolizes striving for better. Nobody's perfect, but we're working at it all the time and try to include and keep things free and fair. We encourage innovation through trade secret protection, and we try to maintain that balance between commercial enterprise and environmental stewardship. From a competitive standpoint, I got quotes like, "The US lagging in space is highly scary." And that's from artists saying that. These aren't space strategists, these are artists. And then if we don't invest, others will. And those others may value symbolism more, in part because they can't compete as well on innovation and budget. And some of them are well practiced in propaganda and won't hesitate to use an opportunity to put art and sport on that stage for their own messaging. Now, just from a numbers standpoint, it may sound like I'm arguing that we should be allocating billions to put an NFL exhibition game on the moon. And that's not at all what I'm saying. I think we've talked about making space boring, making it routine. And right now, our arts and recreation portion of US space industry output is less than 0.1%. So we don't really have that on the radar. It's planetariums, basically. But as we spend more time in space, as we get comfortable, as our jobs are there, and as space becomes boring, that number will naturally trend toward what we've defined ourselves as that 5%, right? So it's going to grow in that direction, maybe not reach there, but that's sort of the growing pie and then the growing slice of the pie, which is our natural behavior. So I talked to Bill Kemp, who's the CEO of United Space Structures, about where we might live as space begins to get boring. And his company designs and plans to build and operate these cylindrical lava tube habitats. They're lower risk in the lava tubes because they're protected from solar radiation, the huge temperature swings from the long days and nights on the moon, as well as from meteorite impacts. There are 25 floors on each structure, each the size of a very large house, and they're designed to be adaptable use. So you may be doing a tourist hotel one week on floor 15, and then the following week, floor 15 gets converted back into a lab for the science that needs to be done there. Obviously, in this extreme environment, function needs to be prioritized over form from an architectural standpoint, but Bill and I did get a chance to talk about sport and art and his concept of these buildings. So I asked if the lava tube was a good place to practice your Hail Mary passes. And he said, well, it's going to be awfully cold in there. And there's also a risk to both the athlete and the structures from running around out there. If anyone's ever been in a lava tube, it can get pretty prickly in there. It's sharp. So running around, playing sports, doing archery is risky to both the athletes and the structures. He did say, though, that he has a vision for the inside of the buildings, not so much architectural appeal, but that there might be virtual windows where you could have views of Earth and sounds of Earth or from space, as well as making work and life interesting through virtual reality. The most interesting thing he mentioned is that he had considered the possibility of putting a swimming pool in one of these structures. And I was curious about that, and I actually found a technical paper online that tested and both experimentally and theoretically calculated what gravity would be necessary for human beings to be able to run on water like lizards and insects do on Earth. And it turns out the moon might actually be one of those places. So if you have a chance to visit one of these structures in the future and you find a swimming pool in the basement, you might want to go give it a shot. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about arts, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about sports, and from today to the future for each one. So space art today, obviously there's been a long history from cave paintings on with art about space. And right now, the things I want to highlight in art about space are the Psyche inspired and other art contests and showcases that are being sponsored by various organizations. And the Psyche Inspired in particular has a variety of arts available. So they're allowing for video and sound on their contest. And so there's dance, there's stop motion animation, there's film, music performance in terms of what people submit. And what that says to me, there are thousands of submissions if you combine these contests. And they're not for prize money. They're just, people are motivated to take the inspiration of space and turn it into real accomplishments. And that's what we talk about with workforce development. Now, when we move into art in space, which is what we're really here to hear about, obviously there are a few installations, but the one I want to focus on is the Tesla Roadster and Starman. And maybe some people don't think of it as art, but I think it is art, and I think it's really good art. In fact, I see it as similar when Elon Musk sends the Tesla Roadster into space. It's a similar kind of art as when Jay-Z in the song I Got the Keys raps that because he's married to Beyonce, he can brag on a whole different level, right? And Elon is bragging that because he has SpaceX and Tesla, he can just brag on a whole different level. And I think it's a very effective art form. I was able to talk with Diane Quinn, who is the Chief Creative Officer of Cirque du Soleil, about how time, space, and technology have an effect on creative design. And those themes that came out with her were also echoed by the prior two interviewees. So these days, people are using technology, experimenting with drones and robots, as well as computer choreography. But the really interesting thing about the way people are thinking about creative arts right now is the experience of the audience. How is the audience going to be consuming it? Because you're less likely to be in a stage, in a big theater, sitting in the seats and perform and having your show seen from that auditorium. So what she and others described were ideas about how to use a phone. If you know that you're going to be consumed on a phone in a vertical orientation, how do you choreograph appropriately to have the biggest impact there? Do you do short TikTok level videos that are then fed at a high rate where people can consume in what they're used to? An alternative to that was that the interior of a self-driving car could be turned into an immersive sound stage where you can set your seat back and have all the surfaces within the self-driving car become the stage. And so this idea of how the audience will experience it rather than starting with, okay, we know we're on a stage, here's what we do, was really fascinating to me. Now, visions for the future of art in space. The artists were very reluctant to talk about what it would look like because art develops from inspiration, either from the venue or the artist's own experience in space. That being said, there were a few conversations and a few things that I found. For instance, the JPL's website has a video of their athlete rover dancing to music. So just going through some of its robotics, and they've set it to music. Pianos rely on gravity to work. What could you design in an instrument to take advantage of a new environment? And then my favorite, the made-to-order meteor showers. We're going to learn how to clean up space debris. It's going to be something we have to do. Why not do it in a time and place where somebody will pay for it as entertainment? So that's sort of the present and future of art. Now I'll talk about sport. So obviously everyone's seen the golf swing on the moon, and some have seen the Red Bull balloon jump. And of course, the astronauts have brought with them various sports apparatus onto the ISS. And Dude Perfect hasn't missed out. They have a video, their popular YouTube channel, who has a video called Trick Shots in Space. They're famous for their trick shots. Unfortunately, this one ended the way many Vomit Comet flights end and was voted one of their worst videos of all time. Now, for the vision for sport and space in the future, I was able to have some really good discussions, one with Linda Reinstein, who's the co-founder of the Space Games Federation, one with Rocky the Mountain Lion, who is a Hall of Fame professional mascot, and then Noah Curry, who's an X Games judge who just happens to be an aerospace engineer as well. One of the most interesting things that came from the discussion was a recurring theme that space could be viewed, or microgravity could be viewed, either as a great equalizer or not. That there was disagreement about whether this would level the playing field for sport or even performing art. So I've made a little chart here where the Space Games Federation, for instance, does believe that space is a place for equity and equality, and that will translate to microgravity being a level playing field, right? That people who are disabled will be able to play with the non-disabled, and the elderly may be able to play with people in their prime because of what microgravity can allow you to do with your body. That's more difficult in a heavier gravity environment. And she sees that as a wonderful representation of some of those words that were on that one slide about how that's a positive, and space represents these beautiful realities. And then in my conversation with Diane at Cirque du Soleil, she said, well, if we go somewhere where everybody can do triple flips, what's the good of, how is that beneficial to us, right? It's an anti-competitive situation, a disadvantage for them. And so she agreed that it would level the playing field in some way, but saw it as a negative. On the other hand, we have the X Game, Noah and Rocky, and they both believed that no matter where you go, competitive spirit, athleticism, agility, hand-eye coordination, and strength are all going to play into developing superiority and accelerating your advantage regardless of the environment. So I found really interesting different views on how that would play out. Now, what will we play? Up in the top right, there's Rocky doing his double flip trampoline dunk. And he does a half court backwards shot, backwards free throw, and makes it an unbelievable amount of times. He says as soon as he got to space, he would up the ante on those two things. And as soon as those were checked off of his bucket list, he'd start experimenting with new things that he could do. And that was a common theme that sports will adapt. These competitors want to come up with new challenges. In the bottom right there's Noah on his skis. He'd love to ski the face near the lunar South Pole, but he actually thought Ninja Warrior would be the best sport to bring with us early in space because it's adaptable to the environment. You can design any kind of obstacles you want and still have it be within that framework. Now, the Space Games Federation has a contest to design sports for space. They've got several of those on their website. These are 3 of the finalists. You've got Space Dodgeball. Spaceball is a Quidditch style game with some magnetism involved. And then Zero Gordian, I thought was really interesting. It's where 2 astronauts, or astrolites as they're called, are tethered together, and they're on the same team. And they've got a tether between them. And their job is to float through space and intertwine so that their tether becomes tied in the assigned knots. And so you can get more and more complicated knots for different levels of difficulty, which is really interesting. And the design of that sport, you could actually start practicing that in a swimming pool on Earth. So speaking of starting out, when are people talking about this? Where and how? So if there was a message of like, let's start yesterday, really, it's a lot of fun. Let's get up there and start doing this. You can work your way up. You can be on the vomit comic. You can be in a swimming pool and then continue on up to new environments. The interesting thing is that there was likely investment from commercial players. I won't mention the numbers that were mentioned on the phone because people were not speaking for those organizations, but we certainly discussed how X Games and Red Bulls want to push the envelope, want to be associated with extreme sports. And then space tourism companies, the expectations of high dollar customers will come into play once flights are longer than 20 minutes and just a dip into space. There'll be an expectation of being entertained. So now that I've talked a little bit about art and sport and the future of those in space, we'll talk about who benefits, right? So clearly the people in space are going to be super excited about this, right? They get to have new challenges and firsts. They kind of get to set the norms for what happens, and people tend to stick with those over time. So you can really make a mark out there. And then, like Dr. Proctor talked about, the cultural experiences can both enhance and be enhanced by your isolation as a crew. And of course, there are physical and mental health benefits of both participating in and consuming sports and arts. But there are obviously benefits on Earth, and we like to emphasize those. There's engagement with new sports. So getting your favorite team on the moon, who's that going to be? There'll be new technologies for sport and art that are developed. More doors will be opened for people to go to space, and those who are already trained will have opportunities to return as athletes or trainers. And then there'll be more jobs in the space ecosystem on Earth. I talked about those secondary and tertiary jobs associated with the industries. Finally, there's inspiration. Again, space being that great developer of inspiration. Gene Cernan, the astronaut, said the more dreamers you have, the more doers you have. And my friend Bernard DeRoy at Armstrong Fine Art in Chicago said, nobody wakes up dreaming of polymers, right? You got to give them some goal, something to shoot for that makes people want to wake up and do the work every day that leads us there. So I started with a question. I want to end with a question as well. Maybe we can revisit that just a little bit down the road. What is a vision that you all have for what you'd like to see happen in space? Would it be that dunk contest or a Quidditch match or a man-made meteor shower? So if you can enter those in the chat, I will say thank you to all the wonderful people who spent time helping to educate me about space, art, and sport.
Thank you, Lee. That was really great. It was pretty eye-opening. I wish we had more time for a conversation here because there's a lot in here that I would like to kind of dig into. The first professor that you mentioned, Proctor?
Yes, Dr. Proctor.
So the high seas is a pretty phenomenal location. It's worth Googling. It's worth getting some imagery of it because it's a pretty fantastic, like fantasy, like it's a fantastic location. So mildly envious that she got to do that. I'm curious. I'd like to see more of the work that she created while she was in that inspirational environment. Thank you, Lee. That was really, really interesting. We are going to have to push on, so I'm going to pass it over to Lila. But Lee, more conversations with you later. Thank you.
I'll look forward to it. Thank you.
Right on.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, Lee, we'll definitely have to do a part 2 on that. Thank you so much. One thing I did want to share, Namrata shared something in the chat that I thought was interesting. There's a new Space Force, the new Space Force Journal has a great place for artists to show their work, and she shared a link with that.
And it has shocking and beautiful art associated with it. It's really beautiful. And as well as very smart.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that out. Thank you again.